Flight management for scorers is slightly different from what a director will be doing, because a director will be typically the person that sets up a flight and adds the tasks to it, where scorers will be using the flight information to do all of their scoring and also making a few adjustments or adding a bit of extra data that's going to assist in the scoring process. So let's walk through that. So here I am on the dashboard for my event, and we can see that we have a flight here. So I'm going to click on the flight 1, and this takes us to the flight data page. And this is the page that has all the information and all the tools related to that flight. And I'm going to walk you through most of the functionality on this page, and there's quite a lot of it, so make sure you pay attention. So firstly, we can see this is flight 1 from Friday morning, and that currently the flight is live. And a live flight means that it is currently in progress. So typically the director will switch it live just before the briefing, and then it will be flagged as complete once everybody has landed and all of the data and the target team results have been captured. On the left-hand side, we have the flight navigation, and we'll be walking through some of this functionality shortly. Below that, we have all the information that has been added to the flight itself. So this is the stuff that will appear in the task data sheet related to the flight. In the right-hand side, we then have all of the tasks and then all the scoring information related to this task. So in this case, the tasks are still live and no scoring has taken place. But once the scoring starts, you'll get different icons appearing in these columns, and we'll take a look at that shortly. In here, you also have a drop-down navigation where you're able to start the scoring as well as edit any of the task information that you require. Again, we'll come back and look at that shortly. Below this, we then have the ability for you to open up and print out the task data sheet. So this is the print view of the task data sheet. And there's also the weather sheet as well. So we can see the weather sheet that's available as well. We also have a few reports about the status of the flight report forms as well as the balloon live data. Below that are the tools for us to process the flight, and we'll talk about that shortly. And then we have all the information related to that flight for each of the pilots. So here, starting from left, we can see the status of the flight report forms. So we have some that have been submitted, we have some that have been approved, and we also have some that have been rejected. We also see the information about the different balloon live tracks. So we can see that all pilots except one have received tracks. And again, in a different training module, we'll look at how we handle balloon live tracks. We then have all the information about the flights, the penalties and PZs, as well as launch time. And we'll come back to that because that is where we require to process the flight before we get any information. And again, we have a menu that's available for each of the pilots. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we're going to start by changing the flight status. So let's say that the task and the flight has been completed, and we want to change the status so that no more scoring, so no more results can come in. So what we do is we come into change flight status on the left-hand side, and we come in here and we can change it to complete. So just talking about the statuses here, draft is when you're first setting up the flight, and that's where everything's being edited and it's not visible on the website. Pending, it's not normally used these days, but it's like being live, but no data can be captured. It's just, it will display the task data sheet on the website. Live, we talked about. Complete means it's all done, and if the flight's cancelled, you can flag it as cancelled. But we're going to change it to complete. Now we can see that the flight is complete and all the tasks have been completed as well. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we want to make some edits to the flight. And this is where, as I said before, the director will have already added all of the information, but sometimes there's a few things that the scorers need to add. So here we have all the information that we typically would not change. Q&H, you definitely do not want to change that because all of the balloon live data is reliant on it. But as you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can see that there are things like the launch period. So when we want to calculate penalties related to launch period, what you want to do as the scorer is come in and put in that launch period information. So the pilot, because often what will happen is it might be based on a green flag and you want to put the time of the green flag in. But here we can see the director had set it at 640 to 720 and we're going to put those values in there. So we'll go 640 and 720. So these numbers don't display anywhere, they're purely used from a scoring and penalty perspective. Okay, now we're ready to process the flight. And what processing the flight means is that we have captured all of the balloon live track data. And when we do that, we're storing the data in what we call an IGC format, which is a very raw format for data. And we have thousands and thousands, in fact, in many cases, we have hundreds of thousands of track points captured. And so what processing the flight does is it takes all of that data and creates it into a format that's much more efficient for the scoring system to use. Also, when we click on Process Flight, it will work out the launch time and the launch location for each of the pilots based on their balloon live track. So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, you basically just click on the Process Flight button and confirm that that's what you want to do. And this may take a few minutes to do. So this is because it's crunching through those thousands of rows of data and processing it. So make sure that when you're doing this, that you leave the window sitting here open and let the progress bar get all the way to the end. You don't want to close the window midway through it because that will confuse the data. So just run it and let it run for a minute or two. Maybe go and make a cup of tea, come back, and then the data will be processed for you. Once it's finished processing, it will bring up a button for you to then click through back to the flight page. Okay, now that we've processed that, you can see that it's been highlighted green and it tells you what time it was last processed. And then when we come back down to the page here where the flight data is, we can see that each of those pilots have been processed, except for the one without a track, and we now have their launch time displayed here as well. Okay, now what we want to do is then go and process any PZ violations or any of the penalties related to things like launch distances or launch scoring period times. So what we do here is we work our way across the workflow. So next we want to go and process the PZs. So what this is going to do is it's going to go and use each of the pilot's tracks and compare it to any of the PZs that have been put in the PZ database. And we've done that in a previous video, in a previous training module, where we've uploaded those PZs. So this is now analysing that, and once that's complete, you'll be able to return to the page, and we can see that we now have processed it, and we actually have one pilot that has a PZ penalty, and we'll come back and have a look at that shortly. And then finally, we want to go and process the penalties. So we click on the Process Penalties button. Again, it loops through that. It's often quite quick. And then we can come back to the page and we'll see again, they've all been processed and we have one pilot with a penalty. Okay, so let's go and have a look at these pilots and see what's happening with these penalties. So we have a thing called a flight analysis page, and that's available for each of the pilots. And what you want to do is make sure you've processed the flights and the penalties before you go in here. So you can either access it here in the right-hand menu, or you can click on the name of the pilot themselves. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're now looking at the flight analysis page for Earl. And there's a couple of things that we can see here. So first we can see their launch time, we can see that they've got a balloon live track, and we can also see the status of their flight report form. Then we can see the penalties. So in this case, we can see that a penalty has been found because their launch point was less than the 300 meters required from the goal for task 1. So we actually have found that he has now got a 42-point penalty that we can use for the scoring. Further down in the page, we can also have a look more detailed about the flight. So here we have a chart that will show you everything around their declaration points, the launch points, all based on time as well as their altitude. So this is really helpful if there's any questions about a pilot saying that their marker was not measured correctly or there's time infringements. You're able to see exactly what they did. And for example, here we can see marker 1 was dropped above the separation altitude. So if there's any questions about the 3D scoring, you're able to easily see what the pilot has done during this process. And then below that, we can see the track of the pilot, and you can see each of their marker drops, as well as their declarations and the launch point. So all of that information is available for each pilot. So again, if we come back into the flight data page, and then we go and check out Elle's page where she's got a PZ infringement, we can come in here, look at it, and says she's actually got a 500-point penalty, which is huge. And that seems a little bit strange. So what we can do for a PZ penalty is click on the map and have a look at what's actually occurred. So when the PZ map loads, we can actually see that she has not turned her balloon live tracker off, and she is driven home. And it just happens that she drove through a PZ and got a PZ infringement. So that's not an actual PZ that we would want to give her a penalty for. But if we continue to look at the data here, we can see that we have a lot of data being captured as a result of her driving back to the competition centre. So you may want to give her a warning from not turning the logger off. So the flight analysis page is very helpful in those circumstances where you're trying to investigate what's actually occurred, as well as giving you the information about the penalties themselves.